29 other organizations like NSF to promote international opportunities for socio-environmental challenge research. So think about global environmental change issues where we couple natural scientists, social scientists, and stakeholders together to solve problems. And so we are creating funding opportunities for you guys moving forward. So keep this in mind as you go on to the next phase of your careers. So what I'm going to do is just go through a little bit about what we do, why we do it, and how we do it, and then look at potential roles for different organizations in the U.S. to be our partners, to come and sort of play with us where it makes sense. So I'm not this audience. I could probably skip the first 5 slides. So we all know basically things are bleak, all right? This is your standard approach that your socioeconomic trends, everything's going up, everything in the Earth system is reaching critical balance, and what we're trying to do is actually start having all this development but not break the planet at the same time. And so a lot of the research that we're funding through this is to how do we have sustainable development on the planet? How can we stay within the boundaries of the Earth system, but then have enough food, water, energy, income, reduce inequality, look at all of the socioeconomic issues, but within a planet where we don't break it. You know, Elon Musk wants to go to Mars, which is great, but I'm not sure they're going to have the infrastructure ready to go by the time we really need to deal with all of these issues. And so there's been a lot of work over the past, I would say, several decades. Folks looking at the boundaries of the planet. You may be familiar, a lot of you are too young for this, but the International Biosphere Program, otherwise known as IGBP, was a big international program that looked at Earth systems science and looking at biogeochemistry and trying to understand how the dynamics of the Earth systems were changing over time. And then there was a couple of other programs that looked at International Human Dimensions Program. There was a biodiversity program. There was a World Climate Research Program. And what you notice about that is they were stovepiped, right? And so for 30 years, they were doing great things. IPCC stuff, all, you know, IGBP put a whole lot of information into IPCC, okay? So we know what the Earth system is doing. We know what humans are doing, but nobody took this and went, we need to look at this holistically. And so in 2009, I would say the sponsors of the programs there looked at this and said, it's really great, we have all this data, but what are we going to do with it moving forward? So they said, I know, let's get everybody together and let them work together. Well, as you guys know, it's not an easy thing to do, to work with someone outside of your discipline and to learn how to do that. But we just said, we're going to do it. And so there was a lot of pushback and some successes and some failures and, you know, moving toward a cultural change. So I'm actually very pleased to see very young faces sitting in this room, as you guys are the next generation of this. And for you to look at these problems and know that a social scientist and a natural scientist and a stakeholder have equal opportunity to come in and talk about a problem and offer solutions and work together to do this is a huge step forward. I can't develop that anymore. I mean, it's an incredible thing. I was a professor, you know, I'm in my thing, I'm teaching my classes, but I want my students to be able to know where to go to answer particular problems. So we're trying to create opportunities to do that. So as we know, the economy, environment, and people are really some of the things that we need to understand in order to fix many of these the problems that we're having. You know, if you're looking to do things in a planet and be sustainable, you have to take into account all three of those pillars. All right, we can't do one thing, because if you have a great technological solution but it's not culturally acceptable, not going to happen. Right? If it's not economically feasible, it's not going to happen. So there needs to be this balance, this holistic approach, these things, and you know, ways that we come together to do this are pretty much the hallmark of the program that I work at NSF and with these 29 other countries to move these kinds of things forward. And so, learning what I have learned today about what Succinct is doing, you guys are poised very well to be leaders in doing all of this. So grab your friends, and hopefully there'll be some opportunities here for you to do this. So many of you know that a few years ago the UN put out the Sustainable Development Goals. They were a big push for coming up on an improvement on the Millennium Development Goals. And basically what we're looking at are things like no poverty, hunger, so big, large initiatives, right? So one of the things that we are looking at is, if I make a decision and an approach to something to look at reducing inequalities or increasing peace, justice, and strong institutions, those changes that I'm employing, do they have other potential unintended consequences on other things? You know, when we make decisions about one specific thing, they can, and often do, have feedback on other things. And so one of the things that we realized very early is that these goals are complex and they're interrelated. Okay, so you make one decision, it has a follow-on on something else. So what we're trying to do in a lot of the work that we're supporting through the Belmont Forum and actually through the National Science Foundation, and basically what you guys are doing, is we're looking for solutions, all right, that look at coming up with dealing with these wicked problems, reducing the trade-offs and balances between the different issues. In order to do that, we all need financial resources to do that. But technology development and transfer is another aspect that can help move these things forward. We need to look at supporting solutions-oriented research and knowledge development. And I'm not saying that we get rid of basic research, because that's not what I'm here to say. It's we build on the basic research to employ teams like you guys to look at problems and build on the, I would say, the basic supported fundamental research that is important to basically moving most of this stuff forward. We're looking at building capacity, all right? You guys are a great example of that. You're learning how to address these problems from many different disciplines. You're learning how to work with each other. You're learning how to be the leaders of this next approach in science. And I think we are getting to the point where we're really good at the fundamental stuff. We know how to do, we know how to support it, but now we're getting to the point where we need to go beyond just interdisciplinary science. We need to do this in a transdisciplinary manner as well. And when I say transdisciplinary, I mean involving stakeholders from the beginning. So it's one thing to say this is the greatest thing that science can deliver, but if it doesn't help someone to make fundamental decisions and to weigh the balances between different things, it's not going to help society really solve the problems that they're looking to solve. And so there's a role here, and there's an interface here. And we need to, at this point, from a funding point of view, provide opportunities for groups of people who want to do this to be able to do this. And I would say that's pretty much the rallying cry that we have with the groups that I work with. So how do we do this? Well, we have fundamental research and innovation on one side, right? And then you have decision makers on the other. So how do you get that across, right? As a scientist, I can publish a paper in Science, right? Decision maker is not going to read my Science journal article and go, I know I need to, do the following thing. Not going to happen. So what we need are people and institutions, opportunities to fill in that. So if you look at this thing as a very old-fashioned, and you'll have to kind of squint, as a bow tie from one side to the other, who's going to be the knot in the bow tie? Well, that's where we think we need to come in. So we're looking at developing holistic systems approaches, basically what you guys are doing here, to look at involving many disciplines, look at the trade-offs between one factor versus another to move things forward. And the way that we've set this up is that we will look at develop and funding what we would call a boundary institution or boundary organization. And I would say that SOCINC is pretty much a great example of that. Another group called Future Earth is the same sort of approach, but those groups that are willing to take the leadership role of bringing science and stakeholders together and providing the training that you guys are getting to be able to do that. And so we're looking at providing opportunities that promote the interaction between the stakeholders and the scientists. We want to get away from, I'm from the government, I'm a scientist, just follow that and everything shall be fine, right? We want, what do you need to do? We understand, here are the challenges that you have. This is potential science approaches to be able to do this. Does this meet your needs? How can we work together with not only natural scientists and social scientists, but let's say visualization experts, communication experts? How do we get this information out to people who need it to make decisions at all levels, not just to government, but all the way down to household folks? How do I make my decision to be able to either involve myself in the recycling program, or what are the other options? Do I drill a well? Do I go on municipal water? What are the things that I need to know to be able to make an informed decision? So how do we do that? Well, we would say we're trying to foster and support innovative partnerships. All right, so we look for groups of folks that are like NSF, but also foundations, folks who have funding from other groups to do exactly sort of what SOCINC does. So you have opportunities here, you have leadership opportunities, you have granting opportunities. So we're trying to bring those groups together to sit around and say, what is it that we can do together that we can't do on our own? So I can easily fund basic research right off the bat, right? But let's say I want to put together a program that looks at transdisciplinary research. So that means I'm going to support natural scientists, social scientists, and stakeholders. At NSF, I can do that. But in other countries, it can only go to researchers at specific institutions. So how can we get a global approach? Well, we work with foundations who can fund the stakeholders to be part of a consortium to look at a problem, so that we don't have to rely on the, I would say, the traditional approaches to things where an academic will get funded to do something, and then they kind of tweak it a little bit and go and work with somebody else to do something else. But what we want to do is bring the team together, like the way you guys work, bring the team together right from the beginning, design the program, get it funded, and off it goes. So we sit and figure out who can bring what to the picnic. And folks will bring whatever they can, they put it on the table, and we sort of have a impromptu party a couple times a year. So the group that I'm talking about mostly is the Belmont Forum. And we are a consortium now of 29 members. That one, we just added 4 new ones. And we have 7 regional partners that are partner organizations. So Inter-Academy Partnership, ICSU, the International Council for Science is us, International Social Sciences. We worked with the U.S. Global Change Research Program, START, which is a capacity building group that is a granting institution mostly for Africa and Southeast Asia. So that's how we bring in developing country scientists. So it's not just developed country approaches to everything, because a lot of these questions and issues need to be solved locally. And so if you don't have that, then we can, if you can't bring those folks in, then the decision making isn't as effective. So we have lots of groups. So from all over the place, the IAI is the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. Again, that's representing mostly South America and Central America, with a bit of North America thrown in. We work all over the planet. As you can see, we're not too good in Africa, but a lot of that has to do with the funding structures that are in Africa. So that's why we work with these regional boundary organizations like START. They can fund folks from Africa. So we don't need a specific group for them. And we've partnered with more than, let's say, 50 resource organizations. So we have our core of 29, but we will work with anyone that wants to play. So if there's a group that is interested in setting up a particular project or program, we're happy to have them come in and work with us. So really, what do? We're looking at connecting interests and investments. So where do we have the common approach to things? What is it that we want to work together on? And that's really where our priorities and our approaches overlap. That's where we go. And again, each partner can bring to the projects and table whatever they wish, and then we will kind of work around that. So our main focus, though, is on, I would say, global environmental change. We try to address what's called the Belmont Challenge, which is to understand, mitigate, adapt to global environmental change. So pretty much you can drive a bus right through that. You can pretty much put anything under it, and we pretty much do that. So really what our big thing here is, our mantra is the 3. You must have social science, stakeholders, and natural science. And it must be truly integrated. You can't have your social science work over here, natural science work over here, and then you both get together and throw things at the stakeholder. It doesn't work like that. We want it to be a truly integrated, iterative approach to some of these projects. So what are we doing? We're working with folks like museums, national research institutes, that's an easy one, colleges and universities. We're getting there a little bit better with our public-private partnerships with philanthropy. And really what we're trying to do is connect those with decision-making. So we have groups, and depending on the project is where you can define the decision maker. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It really depends on the approach and the issue that you're trying to do that. And so we've had policymakers, tribal communities that we've worked with, different NGOs. We've had UN governments be part of our UN organizations. I shouldn't say UN governments. UN organizations be part of our projects. So it really depends, again, on what the issue we're trying to adapt or address. So what we do is we have what we call collaborative research actions. And basically that's just a call for proposals mostly. But we require that it be multilateral, so you have to have you and friends from at least 2 other countries or organizations. You must be inter and transdisciplinary, so you have to have natural science and social science. And you must co-design this with your stakeholder. It needs to be solutions-oriented research. And typically, I would say 95% of what we do is also has some aspect of capacity building. And we look at capacity building as not only folks on the ground outside of academia, but building capacity in academia for folks to be able to work together and put away kind of the, I am the senior researcher, this is how this is going to work kind of thing. But that's building capacity for folks like you who are adept at this inter and transdisciplinary world. So we've had pretty much groups from all over the place. This is actually showing you where our projects are taking place as well. We do not restrict the place that the research is done. Our big thing, and it's similar to what I learned today from you guys, is that we're looking at developing opportunities that are transferable. So we do, a lot of our projects are case studies and comparisons. We look at, is the approach in Bangladesh applicable to, let's say, Siem Reap, Cambodia? You know, or is there a setup in Sydney, Australia that will work in New York City? You know, those are the kinds of things that we're really, I think, pushing more and more of to really understand how different cultural contexts are either enhancing or stopping some of the adaptive things. Along the top, those are the subjects of the latest calls that we've had, and I'll go through a couple of examples of those. But really what we're trying to do here is build an international transdisciplinary culture. All right, so doing here, we want to create a community. One of the things we would love to have are the folks, especially at your career stage, who have worked together and sort of, for lack of a better word, grow up together and be able to have a community who can do these kinds of things without really thinking too much about it. It becomes inherent the way that you approach a problem in a transdisciplinary nature. That's really our goal, and we are far from that, but it's aspirational. So what do we look at? Well, typically we're looking to fund research that overlaps with stakeholder interests, and typically the first calls that we put together were coastal vulnerability and freshwater security. We've had other calls on Arctic observing and science for sustainability, mountains as sentinels of change, food security and land use, so there was a few folks here, biodiversity and ecosystem services, that was a lot of people in this room, food, water, energy, there was someone that was doing that. And then also looking at climate, predictability, and inter-regional linkages, and sort of trying to get away from just a plain climate model, but climate model, socioeconomic approaches, and decision making. So that's a very different approach than, let's say, the IPCC would take. And then we just finished up this one called Transformations to Sustainability. This one is particularly our first approach to have it be a social science-led collaborative research action. So the lead PI had to be a social scientist. But you still had to have natural science, and you still had to have a stakeholder. But we were trying to kind of push that bit forward. And so I'll just skip those two. So we've had 7 awarded calls. Actually, it's 9 now. 10, because we haven't made the decisions yet on transformations. It's almost done. So, but we've had, we've leveraged over, or put in to the system over 74 million euros at that 7, so it's 135 million euros available on the board now that we will have set out the door. We have 6 new opportunities on the horizon, and that's probably what you're more interested in than what the heck has already been done. Thanks, that boat sailed. So here's where we were. The size of the pot of money depends on who jumps in and what kind of resources they bring. But I would say that average for a USPI, you're looking at about 200,000, 150 to 250 per year between 3 and 5 years. So it's not a huge amount of money, but it's not inconsequential either. So, and that usually is split between all the USPIs, so not each individual PI. So the US, if you have 5 partners in the US and it's 250,000, you got to split that 5 ways. But if you're the sole one, then you get the full 250. Really what it is about is providing a little bit of money to leverage your programs that you're already doing so that you can work with your international counterparts and do a lot more than you could all by yourself. And that's really the approach that we've taken. So some of the things that we've funded, like what you guys are kind of doing here, we have groups that are looking at providing tools, decision-making tools, technology transfer, looking at developing potential databases for decision-making, lots of different communication approaches. So any of the projects that we fund, we of course want the academic papers to be done, but we're also looking for deliverables that are relevant to whatever problem you're trying to solve in your project. So a lot of this has to do with things like developing frameworks, decision-making approaches. We do, in some ways, we have to be careful about walking that fine line between helping to inform decisions and advocacy. So that's a big thing with the National Science Foundation. We cannot be seen as kind of promoting one thing over another. But sound, robust, basic science that informs these decisions exactly what we want to do, and put it in a manner or a form that is relevant to decision making. And that is a lot of the capacity building that we're talking about, is to have people be able to do that. Most scientists, you come out of grad school, they don't teach you how to do that, as you well know. So you need to be able to either work with someone who knows how to do that, and that's what we're there to do, is to help promote those collaborations to be able to make things much more user-friendly, I'll say. So we've looked at a whole bunch of different things. Here's just a couple of examples on our regional research. So if we focus on Africa, we've got one of our CRAs looked at coastal vulnerability. So this was one of the very first ones that we did. And they were looking at basically adaptation approaches. And it was really to understand how transnational communities and policy-centered approaches can either be transferable or not, but it's really focusing on when you're looking at climate change and coastal storms increasing, and how do you enable folks to make decisions that are culturally sensitive. And this group was particularly interesting because they did a lot of their approaches were, they did the fundamental science, but a lot of the community outreach was done in Inuit communities. And one of the things they did were song. That's a very culturally accepted approach to things. They did plays, songs, all sorts of different approaches like that. They had one group actually made a quilting and understood sort of the cultural relevance of these things, and to move a community and what that meant, and all of these kinds of approaches. So we will tend to kind of fund things like that, and then all the way down to someone who's doing LiDAR approaches and developing tracking mechanisms for polar bears. So it really depends. We looked at understanding food security impacts and crop expansions. What are those groups working? Every one of these groups here worked with a stakeholder, and really it will depend on what the project is about. The Nile Nexus is interesting. This is to balance sort of the food, water, energy future in the Nile Mountains of Ethiopia. We've looked at learning basically local solutions for determining practices that reduce the vulnerability of marine-dependent coastal communities. So how do you know when you're overfishing? How do you know, and take it upon yourself to be able to understand what it is that these practices are doing, how to set up kind of your own ecosystem monitoring approaches so that you can understand the impacts of community practices on the sustainability of the environment that they're looking at. Again, South Africa, we looked at hydroeconomy and water security, which is actually a big thing. And part of that was in South Africa, in Cape Town. And yeah, that's pretty relevant right now with Cape Town. And so we've had over 68 projects now that we've fully supported. So in terms of basic research and those approaches, we also do other activities like community building. It really depends on where the community thinks it is in terms of answering questions. So one of the things that we do when we decide on an idea, we get some folks from the community, the science community, stakeholder community together to say, if this group of funding agencies were to put money out on the table, where should we focus our efforts? And they usually kind of tell us, some topics and things, but we also ask them, do you feel that, your teams would be ready to go and do these really big research projects, or do they not know each other yet? So where are we and what kind of steps do we need to take to be able to facilitate this? So we have looked at different approaches. We've had some community building activities. We've done some community-driven planning. So instead of trying to compete a bunch of ideas, we brought the community together, and this was our e-infrastructure. So how can some of the issues in data, and you guys are well known about this, but how do we approach data challenges and work together to do that? Who should we be bringing in to help our researchers attack a lot of the challenges that they have? We look at knowledge networks. So we'll build research coordination networks. So you get funds to meet other folks, to plan, to understand where the big challenges are, sort of like a national academies kind of study. What are the grand challenges in X, Y, and Z fields? We also do synthesis, which is what you guys do. But we'll pay for groups to come together and take pre-existing data sets and rework those and come and try to push the boundaries of where things are. So those are the kind of approaches we do. How do we come up with it? Well, someone has a great idea and says, oh, I know. Food, water, energy, effective urbanization on that. Oh, sounds great. So someone will write up a white paper on that, and they will present it at our plenary meeting that we have once a year. And then we say, oh, sounds interesting. We're interested in what we'd call scoping it. So what would the call look like, or what would the activities be supported? So we invite other interested parties and other partners, and we get everybody together, and we have this scoping workshop. And that's really where we ask those questions about where are we, what are the issues that we need to do, where's the community, can we go out, do we need to support networking, do we need to support community building, whatever it is. And then someone steps up to say, okay, we'll run it, we'll herd the cats in the other group, come together, and each person or each organization funds their own eligible researcher. So no money crosses any borders, which if you're a researcher in the US to write a proposal to, let's say, South Africa, the National Research Foundation in South Africa, you're not going to get funded because they're not going to fund you. So what we do is we bring the groups together. We say, you have a consortium you need a minimum of 3 partners. You write 1 proposal. It goes through 1 peer review that we all agree on. And then if your project is selected for funding, then you turn around to your national program. So in the US, people come to me. People in South Africa will go to the National Research Foundation. Folks from Taiwan will go to the Ministry of Science and Technology. They get funded to work together. And so our key to our success over the past, well, since 2012, has been not having funds cross borders. So everyone, there's an agreement that, you know, we will do this work, you will do that work, we will work together. And so really what we have is a virtual pot of money. The benefits of that is that a lot of the budgets across the planet are starting to decline, and there's not as much money for groups to do things by themselves anymore. And to work, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, so I just had a question about the Belmont Forum and its budget and money.
Mm-hmm.
Is it that, for example, the NSF puts money towards the Belmont Forum
Yes.
project?
Toward, what we would say, toward a call.
Okay, so the money is reserved from each of the individual
Yeah,
bodies in each place?
Yeah, it depends on how each organization does it. In the case of Belmont, my budget at NSF is reserved for Belmont, and so I'm automatically in. Other groups, like say Ministry of Science and Technology in Taiwan, they have another mechanism that they do it. The Natural Environment Research Council in the UK does it a little bit differently. But in the end, there's a pot that basically each organization is pledging up to X many whatever. And then that's how, and we will fund, we'll keep going and fund all of the great projects until someone runs out of money. And that's where the limiting reagent is at that point.
And does the Belmont Forum have a physical location?
Yeah, actually. We just are moving from France to Montevideo, Uruguay. And so we have an executive director, a deputy, and then we have a secretariat of about 4 or 5 people that are in-kind support from our members. And so we have a person who is paid full-time to run the show, and then the deputy is seconded from another agency. So we do have infrastructure for this. We also have our own portal for proposal submission. So that's enabling us to do things like tracking, reporting, some evaluation as we get more toward that. So we're kind of trying to not duplicate what the national agencies are doing, but providing a more streamlined approach for this one proposal so that everybody will have access to what they need in the portal, and then we can keep keep the paperwork down to a minimum. Mm-hmm. So really what we're doing here is leveraging and not that's our big thing, is we don't want to duplicate. We want to be able to provide opportunities that really, I would say, augment the national programs that we have already. So if you look at some of the research that we've done here or supported, it will be larger initiatives like food, water, energy. I mean, everyone and their dog is doing food, water, energy, right? So now what we can do is have this international approach that builds on what the national programs are doing without, in essence, diverting funds away from that. So it's complementary and not, let's say, competitive. So we work with a group called Future Earth. And this is a group that is really looking at trying to push, it's an international organization that is trying to push inter and transdisciplinary research, and something that I push you guys to investigate. There are things that are called knowledge action networks. It's basically a network of like-minded people who look at research problems pretty much in the same way that you do. And in some ways, I would say you guys are ahead of a lot of them. And so, you know, there's some leadership opportunities available for those kinds of things. We're looking at basically, so the evolution of Future Earth is that whole acronym soup that I talked about in the very beginning, the IGBP, IHDP, blah, 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 blah. They all came together under Future Earth. And what they're trying to do now is there's lots of different, what we call core projects. So they're established large initiatives that in some ways folks look at and say it's hard to get into. And so we're trying to create opportunities for those core project groups to work with, I would say, regular folks. And one of the ways to do that is through our knowledge action network. So there are opportunities. So let's say a Belmont Forum call comes out and you need to be, and you want to put in a proposal, but you need to have a couple of partners. So where do you go to find them? Well, Future Earth has an open network. We have these knowledge action networks. You can actually start to work with folks on an international scale that are interested in doing what you're doing. And that way, that involvement actually will help you kind of move things forward. And it is international. So right now, we have tens of thousands of researchers in all of these places and looking at, especially through the core projects. We basically have more than 20 national networks that are kind of working together to do this. We've started with 8 or so knowledge action networks, and they're on things like resilient cities, risk and governance, food, water, energy, climate and health, you know, things that will resonate, I think, with a lot of the things, biodiversity, ecosystem services. You know, like-minded folks that are trying to I think, work across these boundaries and really sort of change the way that we're looking at a lot of the socio-environmental problems that we have. So we have lots of international research projects, and we have 5 hubs that serve as the secretariat. So they work together, and they're all over the place. The US is out in Boulder at the University of Colorado and Colorado State. Montreal has a hub. There's one in Japan, there's one in France, in Paris, and there's one in Stockholm, Sweden. And they all work together. This is Future Earth. Yep. So we work with them because we're funding agencies. We know how to develop calls for proposals, but where do we find the outlet, the advertisement for these kinds of things? So, you know, I look at Succinct. It would be a great, you know, whenever we have a proposal or a call for proposals that come out, if you guys could advertise to your network, boom, all of a sudden we get much better proposals. So that's what we're trying to work with, I would say, boundary organizations, people who can actually facilitate that linking of academia and decision making. And so we're constantly trying to bring in new groups that we can get our word out to or work with if they have something special. If there's an idea, we're happy to sit down and try to figure out how to work together to do that. So here are the knowledge action networks. We got the Sustainable Development Goals is one. People are looking at finance, transformation, sustainability, oceans, you name it. I mean, you can pretty much find like-minded folks anywhere. Yep.
How do you become part of the knowledge action network?
So first of all, the best thing to do is jump on and join the open network. And then, so it's just like Facebook kind of thing, registering. And then there's lots of opportunities for chats and development of white papers and things like that. So you can sign up to be part of a knowledge action network. There are activities. If there's something that you guys, let's say you're part of a knowledge action network in, what's your field? So what are your major research?
Food systems.
Okay, so let's say you wanted to look at food security, and you guys had a great idea for something you're working on, some folks in another part of the world that are doing, and you guys wanted to do something together, this would be a great way to get to know other folks and be able to, start moving forward. There's potential for small grants for those kinds of things, depending on what you're looking at, and that's actually the next thing. All right, I'll just get to that. I have 3 more slides, and then I'll get to the small grants. But there would be ways for you. It's kind of a matchmaking approach. It will help you get to know other folks. And
researchers sign up themselves.
Yes, yes. And we're also having not just researchers, so there's other stakeholders, so citizens, science groups, and things like that are starting to get involved in this. And so we're hoping that this framework that we're, kind of supporting and helping will just help people get to know each other a little bit so that they can start to work together. Of course, we have to give folks opportunities to work together, so that's the funding end that comes in on this. So what we do through the reason why we partner with Future Earth is because they have a vast network of researchers, as does Succinct. They have knowledge action networks, so these are the groups that are working together. They have coordination across their global secretariat, so for us it's great. We don't have to work and invest a lot of staff time to be able to herd cats and stuff. That we can work with that boundary organization. They help with synthesis and capacity building. So for us, it was a great way to partner with them. What we've done is every year the community through Future Earth is able to suggest a collaborative research action topic. So this year, the climate, environment, and health has come up, and it was presented to us as a community-driven activity. And so right now, the Belmont Forum said, that sounds great. Let's scope this out. And we're in the process of doing that. What the actual final call for proposals, if it'll be a call, or maybe it'll be a series of workshops or whatever it is that comes out of that, basically has come from the community because they've said we're ready to go on this. So how do you engage with us? Basically, an organization determines what they want to put on the table. So it could be funds and the organization is able to determine who is an eligible researcher. All right. So it'll say we will support X, Y, or Z. Folks can have, organizations can donate staff time to be part of it. So our partners in Australia, CSIRO, I think you guys are working with them. They say anyone who wants to work with staff from Australia, CSIRO, choose a staff member, we're paying their salary already, we'll just pay their extra travel money and they can be part of this consortium. So that's how they do it. Some folks put facilities on the table. If you want to do this, you can come in and use our supercomputer to do whatever. Other agencies or organizations will say, well, we have fellowships and internships, so we can offer that as part of an award package. So like NOAA has several internships. Well, they did. Had several internships. And they were always looking for folks to fill those. So we went to them and said, well, if you guys are ready to have the internships there, we can help advertise and get good folks for that to fill those. And this could be part of a project where the graduate student actually goes to NOAA for 6 months and learns how the science is actually influencing policy. So there's a lot of different opportunities for us to play with around them. And then other folks are providing data, access to data. So there's just a lot of different ways that folks can do it. And again, we have what's called an annex at each of the calls. And each organization will say, this is what we're putting on the table, and this is who is eligible to apply for that. So the other thing we do, we can have project consortium that feature both funding and in-kind contributions. So actually one of the projects that we funded in food security and land use change was actually called DEVIL. Delivering, I love the acronyms when people are always like stretching, yeah. And we're bad because we actually ask for an acronym, so it's, yeah. Anyway, so we have, groups that'll bring together different aspects of government or citizens, nonprofits, and they'll contribute in their own way to a specific overall partnership. And that's really sort of where we can do that. And then also with flexible programming. So we've had a couple of calls where our partners had already made awards in something, right? So they were out ahead of us, so they didn't join our call. But what we did after the fact was got all of our PIs together. So we're creating a community, and that way there was lots of cross-fertilization across the different projects. And so there's ways for us to kind of work together to create this community and move things forward. We're looking at potentially having postdocs go around to each. We have a program now called the Global Sustainability Scholars, and that is for undergraduates where they apply. It's based on the Doris Duke environmental scholar or ecosystem scholars. Anyway, Doris Duke approach. And what it is, basically they apply as an undergraduate in their second year, so sophomore, junior, and senior year. You're actually part of a cohort that goes and works with some of the Belmont Forum funded projects. And so you learn not only different projects, but also a group of folks together, and they put to kind of do like synthesis activities and things like that. But it's for undergraduates to learn about getting involved in field science and transdisciplinary science. So there's a mentor that each of the students has, and there's a coordinator that makes sure nobody gets left on a beach in some foreign place without a passport. The other the way that we also work with Future Earth is they just got about $2 million from the Moore Foundation for seed grants. So they said, you know what, we can provide individual small grants to bring groups together and work with them and provide workshops and those kinds of things, activities to build the projects up before. And then what will happen is we won't restrict the Belmont eligibility to people who have these grants, but the likelihood of having this grant before and developing your project with your group increases most likely how your project is put together and reviewed. So they've come to us and said we can do some complementary things before the fact, and they're also saying that in the end that they also can support things like a little bit of synthesis activities. They can link all sorts of things. So we bring in partners who can do things that we can or can't do. Mostly it's can. So anyway. So where are we now? For partnerships, we're developing ocean sustainability, disaster risk reduction and resilience, science for the sustainable development goals. So think about an approach for systems approach to all of the wicked problems of the SDGs. Another Arctic call, biodiversity and ecosystem services, so folks there. Food security and safety. And then some science-driven e-infrastructure innovation, basically case studies for looking at how to use natural science, social science data together more effectively, and something that you guys are adept at doing. And then on the horizon this year is the climate, environment, and health. And then we're looking at, like the Arctic, to do something for Africa regional priorities. So those are the ones that we're kind of looking at dealing with. So where are we with, that one was just to show that we're actually starting to expand our horizons, working with the health sciences. So the National Institutes of Health and NOAA are on board with this climate, environment, and health CRA. Basically, we're looking at developing a whole program We've got a bunch of groups together that are the funding agencies. There's still plenty of time for folks to come in and work on these kinds of things. But what we intend to do is really to open up from this December coming 2018 is to look at some training approaches, and then a call for proposals sometime in the next, I would say in the next year. And so that's who we are and what we do. So I would hope that, you know, going forward, you guys will have a look at the Belmont Forum and, you know, look at potential opportunities for that, and hopefully look at some of the future Earth approaches and some of the opportunities to work with the future Earth community, and keep supporting what you guys are doing here. So, thanks. I'm happy to answer any questions.